Hello, hello, hello. It's been a long time, about 5 or 6 days since our last stream. We got a lot of things to go over and update ourselves on. But this episode is going to be on the foster care system, obviously, if you read the title and whatnot. And on Thursday, I'm going to be hosting the Getting the Answers episode 17, if I'm remembering the numbers right. And it's going to be also on the foster care system with my co-host Anna Voltes on the show we do every week, where we alternate our channels. So I'm going to kind of research some stuff on the foster care system, statistics and problems on the numbers, are the corruption of the foster care system, the dark side of the foster care system, whatever kind of terminology you want to use on that. But we're going to kind of look at all of our statistics and information on the foster care system. Today is also going to be a little bit of a shorter stream as well, because I don't have too much voice left. I've been having some allergy issues or something. But so we're going to kind of keep it a little bit shorter and watch a little bit more videos than usual. I just thought we would kind of start on this and go from there. Because we all know the common kind of concerns within the foster care system, especially when you start talking about other topics kind of relating to the foster care system potentially. You can talk about abortion rights, you can talk about adoption, you can talk about the foster care system just in itself, you can talk about the sex trafficking that can sometimes happen around these foster care systems. You can talk about how a lot of times parents might pass the adoption procedures for the state, but then end up mistreating their adopted foster care child. You can talk about drugs and alcohol that some foster care houses or facilities have troubles with. There's just a lot of numerous topics within just the main topic. I guess you could call it subtopics if you want to get all fancy. But I think we're just going to be kind of looking at some general statistics, some personal stories on YouTube of foster care parents or people who've worked in foster care facilities. Then we're going to look at some strategies for how the foster care system could be fixed or at least improved upon. And then we're going to kind of end after that. So like I said, it is going to be a little bit shorter of a stream. But yeah, I'm just going to get right into that. But before we kind of dive into the topic, I just wanted to quickly mention again that I will be a part of an April 17th 24-hour live stream for suicide prevention charity. I should call it a charity live stream. And it's going to be on a fellow Freedom Scoopers channel, or not channel, what's the words for it? Channel works. It's going to be on his YouTube, it's going to be on his Twitch, it's going to be on his Facebook, well, one of their Facebooks. I don't think it's on the main's Facebook, but there's a poster going around for it that you can find on my Twitter or on my Discord server. And I'm going to be setting up links after this live stream to have a link for that charity stream. So all you need is the one link for to get all the information you will need. And there's going to be a lot of good guests within the Liberty movement, and a lot of the good guests just within Twitter and within politics for YouTube or Twitch or whatever else. So there's a lot of good guests. There's a lot of the regulars who are a part of the Freedom Scoop network that I am also a part of, like the person I just mentioned, Jay Edgar. You also have Stephen and Gramus, you have the Generational Gap, you have the Freckles and Brit Show, and you have the R-Rated Conservative. You have all these fantastic content creators to where you can get your daily dose daily dose of news or get your shows a couple a week to get all information you want with some funny takes or just an average person's takes on the situation, and not just what you always kind of hear repeated from news networks and whatnot. But I'm going to write to make sure I don't forget to set up that link. Set up link for charity 24-hour live stream on Ed's channel. Alrighty. So we got all that written down, so that should all be good. And hopefully I won't forget to do that. Okay. So I guess we can just dive into our topic we have here. This is from the childrensrights.org. Yes, childrensrights.org. So I'm just going to read from the top and then we'll get into our statistics all about it. Many of Americans' child welfare systems are badly broken, and child can suffer serious harm as a result. Some will be separated from their siblings, others will be bounced from one foster care placement to another, never knowing what their lives will be uprooted next. Too many will be further abused in systems that are supposed to protect them, and instead of being safely reunited with their families or move quickly into adoptive homes, many will languish for years in foster homes or institutions. So right, that brings up one of the biggest concerns for the foster care system itself, and that's being the general way foster care is supposed to work. And hello there, Ron. That stream is Sunday, right? I believe it's Saturday. It's the 17th, if I am remembering right. And I'll have to look at the poster again just to make sure that I am aware of the date. But I believe that's Saturday going till Sunday because it is 24 hours. So I think it's starting at midnight on Saturday. So you could call it basically a Sunday stream if you wanted. But yeah, that's for the 24-hour stream my man Ed is doing, and you could say the Freedom Scoop is doing as well. But yeah, we'll go back to what they were saying there, and hopefully you're having a good day as well, Ron. But that's one of the biggest concerns I guess many people have with the foster care system itself, really, because foster care is supposed to be something to where children can go to and have the opportunity to be adopted into homes, or at least live in a foster home with supportive people. And they may not necessarily have the core parent structure of a mom or a dad, or in this case, whatever two people you want to name, have that structure. They don't have the two parent structure, right? And it may be a group of people who are trying to help a group of foster kids, but they're still getting that implementation or aid and not just being kind of left alone. But also the process behind being in a foster home is the idea that you are going to find a home to adopt you. In other words, foster care facilities or foster homes are not supposed to be for your whole life or for many, many years. And they're supposed to be almost a sort of step away from actually being involved within a family. And if you get stuck for several years in foster facilities or moving foster facilities and just being stuck in the trap of foster care in general, then you're not really helping the situation, and it can lead to many problems. And adoption procedures and adoption in general in the United States, even from within your state, is a very hard process. And that's forgetting any adoption rights that you want to do out of country. And there's plenty of people that have anecdotal experience for trying to adopt through a foster home from another country. I know that my cousin was from Russia when she got adopted, and she was very young. I think she was only like 1 or 2 years old. So she only lived in Russia for a very short period of time before they adopted her to the United States. And I know that they had many, many years of problems trying to actually adopt her into the United States. And my backdoor neighbor also adopted a kid from another country. I'm forgetting where the country was now, but they had very similar issues and problems as well for trying to adopt through another country. So adoption through another country is a whole nother topic. But even adoption from within your state and adoption from United States in general is also a very long process. And that process can be good because it ends up saving potentially abusive situations from happening out of the foster care facility. So in other words, making sure that the parents who end up being the parents of this kid are good people and aren't going to hurt that child is a very good thing, and isn't going to lead them to any of, I guess you could call it, like the deadly sins through sex or sex trafficking, or maybe through drugs or even alcohol, or anything that would be considered bad by any person's standards. So having that vetting procedure is obviously something that should happen. I don't think adoption should just be full gone, no standards, no procedures, just whatever you want, you just adopt the kid. I don't think that that's ever going to be a good situation to try to fix the system. But you also have to realize that the process is kind of broken if more of a percentage of people are being kept in foster cares than are actually being adopted. Ron Helton says, "Oh well, I'd probably be able to catch some of it then. Working in the garden and removing some trees to let the sun in." Yeah, for real. When you have big trees and you're trying to grow like fruit trees or just a general garden, those trees can be a little bit of a pest sometimes. And then Ron says here, yeah, like child predators and molesters. Exactly. That's the big thing, and that's why adoption procedures are the way they are for the most part. And there's still plenty of examples of kids who gotten adopted out of foster homes, are adopted in general, and had horror stories through sex trafficking or through molestation or through any number of pretty horrific things being done to them. And you see that in a number of situations, really, and that's why the adoption procedures are mostly the way they are. But there's still a issue with how adoption works for the process, because the fact that happens, the fact that some parents or parent or whatever the procedure might be was able to adopt this kid and then later went on to do something horrific to that child means that the way that adoption procedure is done and adoption vetting is done is obviously needing to improve. In other words, it almost is like this. You could take any governmental concern or any problem that's happening, and you could say, well, if there's one bad apple in this mix of good things, then do we just ignore this bad apple and keep trying to do the same thing, or do we need to actually focus on what the problem is? And a lot of times I think people just ignore the bad problem, the bad apple, and just keep going. And when it's something, when you're dealing with children, it's something that's at a whole different level. It's not like you're trying to decide if we should improve the potholes on the main road to the highway, or if we should improve this backyard patio to a restaurant, or should we pay for another park for the community to have. It's not one of those sort of issues where if the decision is no, it's not really going to affect anybody, and if the decision is yes, then it may help, and it may help the situation, but again, it's not like it's going to be a huge concern. When you're dealing with something like children and children's rights, you obviously need to make sure that you are addressing the situation. It's a lot more problemsome than any generic issue that government might have. I don't know if I necessarily explained that super well, but basically what I'm trying to say here is if there is a small problem within an adoption procedure or within what's happening in foster homes, it needs to be addressed, period, in the statement. I don't care if 99 other times that exact situation is a good thing, or I don't care if every other time the situation is good, but one time is bad, and you go, okay, our percentage is 99%, we're good, we can keep doing what we're doing. That's just, you can't have that when you're talking about the foster care system and adoption procedures and what could potentially happen within a situation that drastic of a deal. Ron Helton says, ignoring bad apples is how was able to abuse and kill so many men. Oh yeah. I butchered that, but I get what you're saying. I still can't believe I'm going to be a teacher and have to read names and read things. I'm terrible at reading. Okay, so let's start to read some statistics here by childrensrights.org. On any given day, there are nearly 424,000 children in foster care in the United States. In 2019, over 672,000 children spent time in the U.S. foster care. On average, children remain in the state care for over a year and a half, and 5% of children in foster care have languished there for 5 or more years. Despite the common perception that the majority of children in foster care are very young, the average age for, let's try to repeat that again. On average, wait. Okay, here we go. Despite the common perception that the majority of children in foster care are very young, the average age of kids entering care is 8 years old. So that's another interesting thing as well when you're talking about the foster care system, because like I just mentioned, if I were to ask you what you thought the average age of somebody in a foster care system might be, you would probably think they would be anywhere from, let's say, a year to maybe 3 years. Because that's when the majority of people would tend to get adopted. Because parents, if they can't have children or they just decide to adopt, tend to want to adopt a lot younger in age, where they're actually able to put in their family values or put in their discipline methods or be able to mold this adopted kid into their own family, into their own family. And that's usually when you want to do that, the younger that the kid actually is, because they're able to mold their brain a little bit better when they're younger to the new structure of the family, or in some cases maybe even a new language, because they may have come from a different country. But if you're just talking about the United States, you might not ultimately have to worry too much about that. But there's even many children who are in foster care in the United States who don't know your language because maybe they came from a different country. So even if you are adopting from within the United States foster care systems, you could still have that same concern. So that is a very interesting statistic that they're over the age of 8 years old, because 8 years old is you start to get into having a little bit more of an effort to try to influence the child's influence the child into your actual family more than someone who is a little bit younger. I think that says Gacy owned a construction bushes and did gigs as a clown. I think that's Gacy, if I'm remembering his name right, and what Ron said there. I think I vaguely remember who you're talking about. I may be thinking of somebody else. I could be thinking of a mass murderer. Because I was a mass murderer that tended to go for younger men, children really, younger guy children. And anyway, he would do horrific things and later kill the teenagers or younger boys. That's the word I was looking for. I don't know why it didn't come to my mind. So maybe that isn't the same person I'm thinking of from the true crimes. Yep, that's the same person. Yeah. And obviously he used the foster cares as a place to do so, because regardless of what you think about the foster care system, maybe the foster care system is still a very potentially easy thing for somebody who's a child predator to do whatever they wanted to, because the children themselves are relatively weak and in some cases looking for somebody to have as a role model, somebody to support them in what they're going through. And in some cases, it can be used by people who have very bad intentions and decide that they want to use that to their advantage, like Mr. Gacy did, which was terrible things he did to children who tended to be in foster care systems, or people who were desperately needing somebody to kind of mentor their lives. So you have to be very careful, and like I was mentioning earlier, that is why in a large part the adoption procedures are as strict as they are. But even when you're talking about adoption, there's still very bad apples that get away and end up doing horrific things. But you can also just talk about in general, a lot of these foster children don't even get adopted by many people who end up using them for whatever thing they wanted to use them for. Because they could catch them on the way to schools, they can catch them on the way back, they can catch them just hanging out with their friends, or maybe while they're at the park. They don't necessarily have to be adopted to be taken advantage of. And that's also another concern, because unlike having an actual family who in general would tend to take more care of you and be able to watch you more because you're within a family structure, being in a foster family isn't exactly the same thing. So that's also another concern as well. And I mentioned this before, but I think it needs to be kind of mentioned more in the factor of when they're talking about foster care. But most of foster kids are looking to be in a family. That's their ultimate goal. No matter who you really are, you kind of want to be a part of something. And when you don't have parents, and you don't have people as role models, you are looking to have role models. You're looking to have somebody who could be your parents. And there's people that are in families and don't have good parents, and they search for mentors. So if you have a bad dad, or you have a bad mom, or both your parents are bad, then you might look elsewhere to have role models. And because that's just kind of what human nature is. We want to have somebody to ultimately take care of us. Even the people who are outright leaders, people who are usually the person that gets asked questions or tells people what to do, even they at some point need somebody to ask questions to and somebody to support them. Nobody can go without any support, because it's just not really how humans work and how human brains work and what we search for as a species. So you have to take that into account when you're talking about the foster care system as well. But I think we've kind of talked enough about that topic, because we have a few statistics later on that talk about some of the darker statistics for foster care. In 2019, 1/3 of children entering the U.S. foster care were young people of color. That's interesting. While most children in foster care live in family settings, like that's what I was mentioning a little bit earlier, a substantial minority, 10%, live in institutions or group homes. Right. So this was something I was mentioning a little bit earlier. A lot of times these foster care facilities have a option, I guess you could say, or option's kind of a bad word for this, but let's put it this way. A lot of the foster homes, when we think about foster homes, just the thing that kind of comes to our minds is a group of people of all different backgrounds in one house that get led by a couple of people, and these couple of people are usually parents, are usually a married couple, are let's just go with that, are usually like a married couple, and maybe they have a couple of helpers that come or maybe live in the foster home 24/7. But you have a group of random strangers, I guess you could say, that live within that setting of the foster home. And it's their responsibility to kind of take care and have more of a family group atmosphere than, say, if they were in a regular institution. That would be much more kids to teachers or to mentors in the actual home. So long story short, basically what I'm trying to say here is that most children live in these family type of settings, in family type of homes. So they might have some role of mentorship between the older kids who've been in that foster home for a long time, or the people who are acting as parents or acting as mentors from within the facility. And then when you talk about institutions, you're talking about a much more broader sense of what a foster home is, being that there's a lot more people than there are mentors, as I just mentioned, meaning that they don't really act as much as a family as a daycare. And daycare and family is much, much, much different. And it is something also to take into account when you're talking about the foster homes or foster care setting in general. In 2019, more than 71,000 children whose mothers and fathers' parental rights had been legally terminated were waiting to be adopted. That's interesting. In 2019, more than 20,000 young people aged out of the foster care without permanent families. Research has shown that those who leave care without being linked to forever families have a higher likelihood than youth in general population to experience homelessness, unemployment, and incarceration as adults. So I thought that was one of the biggest kind of statistics within looking at this site and looking at within this page about the foster care system, being that 20,000 young people age out of the foster care system without having without getting into a permanent family or a family structure. And that's something that is a little bit concerning, really. I think that is a little bit concerning, because especially when you talk about people and just how humanity works, or how humans as a species work, we oftentimes are really focused on having people as mentors, having people that act as parents, even if they aren't necessarily our actual parents. So without ever having that as part of how you grew up and how you learned about life and how you learned about life, it can lead to problems. I guess you could kind of compare that to people who grow up without a parent, or in some cases without both parents. A lot of times statistics seems to point that people who grow up without a parent or without both parents tend to be incarcerated at much higher rates and tend to commit more crimes at much higher rates, which leads to incarceration. So the statistics are kind of the same when you think about it that way. But even when you're talking about just that statistic alone, and not necessarily people who are within foster homes, you can kind of see the same sort of correlation. So the statistic does make a little bit more sense, but it's obviously something that is very concerning when you're talking about the foster care system and just exactly what happens from that. And I don't think it takes rocket science to suggest that makes a lot of sense. I don't really think you even need to ultimately. It doesn't take rocket science to understand that statistic and why that is ultimately a big problem when we're talking about the foster care system. So before I just keep blabbering on about that, we will move on to our next site once I get our next music up here. I'll make sure we can hear everything all good before we continue. And feel free to comment any questions or ideas that you have, maybe with trying to fix the foster care system or anything like that. I will definitely be willing to read those and come up with my response to them. Alrighty, so this is by Alternative Family Service for Kids.org, and it mentions 29 surprising foster care facts. And we're going to see some similar statistics based off of the previous site that we just mentioned, but I thought that it gave many more examples or statistics also to a little bit more background information on exactly what was happening. I was hatched? Or were you trying to say I was hacked? I was hatched, I think. Anyway. The average age of foster youth is 8.5 years old. We already know that. And foster youth typically spends just under 2 years, 20 months in foster care. Interesting. So, I'll read that again. A foster youth typically spends just under 2 years, 20 months in foster care. So, 20 months in a foster care facility before they are adopted into a family. And the amount of people who are physically in foster care is pretty high. So, I'm not really sure if that's really that good of a statistic or not. I don't really think that it is as good as it probably needs to be to have a perfectly ideal system for trying to solve the problem of too many people within these foster care facilities and things like that. Over 25,600 foster youth spend more than 5 years in foster care. That's quite a long time. More than 1,200 youths are placed in foster care nationwide because of their own alcohol dependence problems. Over half of all foster youth are reunited with their family or primary caregiver when they exit the system. 6% of all children in the U.S. will find themselves in the foster care system before they turn 18. Foster youths are 7 times more likely than non-foster youth to have depression and 5 times more likely to have anxiety. That statistic makes a lot of sense. That statistic makes a lot of sense. There are 10% more youth in foster care nationwide in 2016 than there were in 2012, so we're seeing a large increase of numbers within the foster care system. 1 out of every 5 people who age out of the foster care system lack a home when they turn 18. So 1 out of every 5 people, that's a pretty large percentage, being 20% of people who turn 18 and never end up having a family. And when you think about it, like we were mentioning a little bit earlier, or I was mentioning a little bit earlier, with parents more wanting to adopt younger kids instead of older kids to their family, you don't typically see a lot of times parents adopting 14, 15, 16-year-old kids from a foster care system or from adoption in general, as you would any younger aged category. By the time foster youth are 24, only half of them will have stable and steady employment. The same percentage develops substance abuse. Among former foster youth, 1/3 of all males and 3/4 of all females rely on government assistance programs. In comparison to veterans, former foster youth are twice as likely to suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. Close to 56,000 children are foster youth in California. Just under 4 out of every 10 to 38% to be precise. Foster youth in California will never find a permanent housing placement. Close to 19,000 former California foster youth are presently enrolled in Medi-Cal. 1 out of every 2 foster youth has dealt with 4 or more adverse childhood experiences. 8 out of every 10 foster youth enter the system with noticeable mental health needs. Just over 51% of all foster youth graduate high school. Just 1 out of every 5 foster youth is at grade level in English and language arts in 3rd grade, and only 9% are at grade level in math in 8th grade. That's an interesting one. Less than 1/4 foster youth enroll in college. By the age of 26, just 4% of former foster youth had successfully obtained a bachelor's degree. 54% of all foster youth who are adopted have parents over the age of 50, and 16% have parents that are 60 or older. Interesting. 70% of children adopted out of foster care have married adoptive parents, and 55% of them did not know their adoptive parents beforehand. What? I guess that makes sense. Among former foster youth who are later adopted, 27% are white, 35% are black, and 16% are Hispanic. Among those adoptive parents, 63% are white, 27% are black, and 5% are Hispanic. As for the reasons for adopting foster youth, 86% did so to provide a permanent home for a child, 39% did so because of infertility, and 24% did so because they wanted their child to have a sibling. 60% of parents adopted a foster child instead of an infant because it was cheaper. 95% of parents who foster... Let's read that again. 95% of parents who foster youth said that they would make the same decision again. Around 184,000 households in the U.S. have a foster youth in them. Oops. We need to move this. It's too late now, but I just now noticed. Compared to their peers, male former foster youth are 4 times as likely to commit a crime. Females are 10 times more likely. Okay. So there was a few surprising statistics within that. Definitely something to kind of wrap our heads around the main concept of foster care, and some statistics about age and usually how the dark side can become a little bit more appealing to kids who are in foster care compared to the more ethical sides of things because of what they have gone through. I think the most interesting statistic to me was the PTSD statistic, where they compared it to veterans, and that foster care children have more PTSD, or at least the same amount of PTSD as a veteran. I think that statistic would depend a lot on what type of veteran you are ultimately talking about. But the fact that PTSD is around those same levels is still very concerning by any means. So one of the major things also when you kind of talk about the foster care system is talking about parent rights and the concept of child protective services. Child protective services being the idea of, obviously from their name, keeping children protected, and that can be from their own parents to keeping them protected from foster homes, to have good rights, good conditions, and treating everybody in good ethical manners instead of just all-out craziness. So in other words, their child protective services are there to make sure that children's rights are being protected from whoever it may be in that case. So this was a interesting article, and we're going to read the summary first before I get into the details of the article. This article's author worked with around 300 cases in Georgia, along with hundreds across the nation. She shares heartbreaking stories of CPS corruption, including how children are being taken away unnecessarily and put in very abusive situations. So let's go on and read. My introduction into child protective services cases was due to my grandmother in a Jordan state who called me with her tragic story. Her two granddaughters had been taken away from her daughter who lived in my district. Her daughter was told wrongly that if she wanted to see her children again, she should sign a paper and give up her children. Frightened and young, the daughter did. I have since discovered that parents are often threatened into cooperation of permanent separation of their children. So even if the children are living in bad conditions, or the parent may have done something potentially bad to the child and got CPS called on them, a lot of times parents are still sympathetic to their children. In other words, that they still want to be able to raise their children, or at least have contact with their kids. They still want to be parents, even if them themselves are going through maybe alcohol problems or drug problems or pill problems or whatever a situation they ultimately might be going through. But We'll read on and see what this article also has to say after I adjust our article a little bit. So hopefully we can read all of this. We're just gonna go like this. Okay, the children were taken to another county and placed in foster care. The foster parents were told wrongly that they could adopt the children. The grandmother then jumped through every hoop known to man in order to get her granddaughters. While the case finally came to court, it was made evident by one of the foster parents' children that the foster parents had at any given time 18 foster children, and that the foster mother had an inappropriate relationship with a case worker. In the courtroom, the juvenile judge acted as though she was shocked and said that the two girls would be removed quickly. They were not removed. Finally, after much pressure being applied to the Department of Family and Children's Services of Georgia, the children were driven to South Georgia to meet their grandmother, who gladly drove to meet them. So, it was an anecdotal case of corruption, but we are going to continue reading here. After being with their grandmother 2 or 3 days, the judge, quite out of the blue, wrote up a new order to send the girls to their father, who previously had no interest in the case and who lived on the West Coast. The father was an adult entertainer, his girlfriend worked as an escort, and his brother, who also worked in a business, had a sexual charge brought against him. Within a couple of days, the father was knocking on the grandmother's door and took the girls, kicking and screaming, to California. The father developed an unusual relationship with the former foster parents and soon removed to the southeast. The foster parents began driving to the father's residence and picking up the little girls for visits. The oldest child had told her mother and grandmother on 2 different occasions that the foster father molested her. So again, we're getting into some very dark themes when you're talking about the foster care system here, really. And it is very, very concerning. And something that I think ultimately needs to be discussed more, as this is a single case or an anecdotal case of something very bad happening with CPS, and ultimately what led to this horrible experience for the child. But again, you're also talking about something that is very bad, really. But we'll continue on with what this article has to say. To this day, after 5 years, his loving, caring blood relative grandmother does not even have the visitation privileges with the children. The little girls are, in my opinion, permanently traumatized, and the young mother of those girls was so traumatized with shock when the girls were first removed from her that she has never completely recovered. The mother has rights, but the father still has custody of the children. Throughout this case and through the process of dealing with multiple other mismanaged cases of the Department of Family and Children's Services, I have worked with other desperate parents across the state of Georgia and in many other states because their children would be taken for no cause and they have no one with whom to turn. I've witnessed ruthless behavior from many caseworkers, social workers, investigators, lawyers, judges, therapists, and others such as those who pick up the children. I have been stunned by what I have seen and heard from victims all across this land. Excuse me. In this report, I have focused mainly on the Georgia Department of Family and Children's Services. However, the Child Protective Services nationwide has become corrupt and the entire system is broken beyond repair. I'm convinced parents and families should be warned of the dangers. The Department of Child Protective Services, known as the Department of Family and Children's Services, in Georgia and other titles in other states, has become a protected empire built on taking children and separating families. This is not to say that there are not those children who do need to be removed from wretched situations and need protection. So right here is obviously a place to state that the reason for Child Protection Services, the reason for CPS is to remove children, to remove non-adults from a potentially bad situation. A lot of times you could think that a children's might be removed in the case of divorce that the parents are going through, or in the case that there is a restraining order against a ex, or a restraining order against even the partner that that person has. So in situations like this, it may be a very good situation for CPS to get involved to protect the child in the situation that could ultimately become violent, or in some cases has become violent in the past. But what this article and this anecdotal evidence is ultimately bringing up is when that is not really the case in what's happening, and they're removing children, and potentially in this case, in this scenario, what we just read previously, putting the child in direct harm for someone that was charged with a sexual crime before getting access to the child, and it then led to the problem happening. And anybody with any sort of common sense might have seen that coming, or at least could have warned that that could have happened. Even if it's a hard thing to ultimately think of happening when it is ultimately your own child that you're responsible for and supposed to be taken care of. But we obviously know that this isn't ultimately what happens, even though this isn't ultimately what happens. But we'll continue on. We'll see what this article has to say. In this report, I focus mainly, we've already read that. However, this report is considered with the children and parents caught up in legal kidnapping and effective policies in an agency that on certain occasions would not remove a child or children when the child was enduring torment and abuse. So, once again, this study or this article, whatever you want to call it, is pointing out that even in the case of what CPS is supposed to be used for, which is protecting children and removing children from potentially violent situations, they aren't necessarily doing that to the best of their abilities or at all, depending on who you ask. And it mentioned that they weren't even removing children in the case of actual abuse or actual trauma happening to the children directly. And that in any scenario is supposed to be what CPS is to be involved in. If something bad happens to that child, CPS is supposed to come in and protect that child and be that governmental force, I guess you can call it, to help the situation and to reduce any more potential violence from happening. I could think of many cases where this could be called, and there's many situations like, for instance, the doctor, where if the doctor thinks that there's potential harm on a child, that he can call CPS and to make sure that this child isn't actually being physically harmed by someone who's a relative of theirs or even maybe their parents themselves. But we'll read the rest of this. In one county in my district, I arranged a meeting for 37 families to speak freely and without fear. These poor parents and grandparents spoke of their painful, heart-wrenching encounters with the DFCS. Their suffering was overwhelming. They wept and cried. Some did not know where their children were and had not seen them in years. I witnessed the gazebo at work, and I witnessed the deceitful conditions under which children were taken in the middle of the night out of hospitals, out of school buses, and out of homes. In one county, a private drug testing business was operating within the agency's department that required many drug tests from parents and individuals for profit. It has already made over $100,000. Due to being exposed, several employees in a particular office were fired. However, they have now been rehired either in neighboring counties or in the same county again. According to the calls I am now receiving, the conditions in the county are returning to the same practices they had before the light was shone on their evil deeds. Having worked with probably 300 cases statewide and now hundreds and hundreds across the nation and in nearly every state, I am convinced there is no responsibility and no accountability in child protective care systems or services systems. Okay. So obviously this could be just anecdotal experience for her particular county or counties within Georgia and the CPS that is involved there. But if you're calling CPS as being one of the systems for not reducing potential harm at child's, and in some cases leading to the harm of children within the foster care system, adoption process, or even protecting them from their actual parents by DNA, so to speak, then you're ultimately leading to the situation that you're responsible for being the very thing that causes the harm for. So in other words, if CPS is also another thing to blame within the very complex foster care system and adoption process of the United States, then you're leading to an even worse situation than many people probably thought when going into this topic, and even what I thought when approaching this topic. Because the CPS, the Child Protective Services, are there to protect children from their biological parents or from foster care systems, adoption parents, whatever name you want to ultimately say from within that category. But we'll continue on with our next article about the broken foster care system, but we will put on some more music meanwhile. I don't see anybody on right now, or I would ask if somebody is watching right now, you can definitely give me a option for music. You can give me some option for any music that you particularly like. I particularly like music with no words, kind of background music, because we're kind of concentrating on this idea and the foster care system. But we'll check this one out real quick, and then we can get into our next two articles before we have a good video for us to watch. Okay. So this is our next article. I might be able to resize this a little bit for us so we can actually see this article a little bit better. Perfect. Alright. So this is going to be another little bit of a long read, but we should be able to get this here. And this is by the howleronline.com or .org, excuse me. On the paper, the foster care system is picture perfect. A neglected child is lifted up from a broken home plagued by abuse and mistreatment to then be gently placed in a warm, welcoming environment with safety and stability. In reality, this picture perfect cloak disguises dangerous failures that leave children vulnerable and defenseless. Ooh, if I can read. The majority of children in the foster care come from environments of abuse and neglect, typically curated by biological parents who have fallen victim to drug addiction, incarceration, or death. As the opioid epidemic continues to escalate, the need for foster parents is greater than ever. Research from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services found that in 2019 was the 5th consecutive year in which the number of children entering foster care grew. States are increasingly experiencing acute shortage of competent foster parents and scramble to find places for hundreds of thousands uprooted from their homes. This national crisis is in search for foster parents stems from inadequate training and lack of support that drive approximately half of all foster parents to quit fostering children after their first year. So a lot of times, especially once we get into our first video, which is an actual foster parent and her experience with foster care and what everything she had to go through, is how tough foster care house is and how tough the idea of foster care is. And I'm going to let her kind of explain those ideas because she can explain it a lot better than I can. But there is another concern and another approach you could take when looking at the foster care system. Not so much from the foster children who are in the system, but you could also look at it from the angle of trying to facilitate or trying to have a foster home and the problems that you might face with trying to lead or trying to have a effective foster care facility. And we will get into talking about that a little bit later. I just wanted to mention that before I forgot to do so. Plucked from their houses or plucked from their homes with no place to go, thousands of children are sent to juvenile detention centers and shelters and group homes. All locations agreed upon child welfare experts as the ultimate last resort for a child's growing environment. Isolated from the outside world in cold, harsh facilities with little social interaction and treated as criminals, foster children in Congress face conditions not much better than the ones from which they were removed. These children often jump from shelter to shelter, uprooted by the lack of sufficient resources in care centers, and have been called by child advocacy experts as homeless in foster care. Homeless and foster care. That is something that is kind of sad if you think about it. If you think even forming people within the foster care facility and trying to give them a second chance or a chance at finding parents or finding a home that will support them in that way. But if it's just another example of getting trapped into a system and not really improving the situation and almost just leading to the phrase that they use there, homeless in foster care, then you obviously know that there is major things wrong with what is happening for a foster care system. In just Washington state alone, more than 200,000 foster children have had to stay overnight in hotels due to lack of housing provided by the foster care system. In 2019, a few slept in the offices of their own social workers. Oregon has also placed children in refurbished juvenile centers and former police stations concealed with new decor. With these dreadful conditions, it's no surprise that many foster children are desperate to get away from the system meant to help them. In 2013 alone, over 4,500 foster youth ran away from group facilities or temporary shelters. When children feel so guilty and unwanted by a system meant to protect them, and they end up running away, it is strikingly clear that the system is deeply flawed. Children who are placed in hostile settings like juvenile detention centers are given an impression that themselves must have done something wrong, integrating in their minds the idea that the system is not meant to help, but rather punish. As such, insustainability, already vulnerable children, many are pulled further away from resources that invest in their long-term futures. Nearly half of the foster youth nationwide never graduate high school, and even less than half are able to earn money from employment at any given time. 1 in 5 will enter the homeless population, and 1 in 4 will be involved with the criminal justice system within just 2 years after the foster care. After years of trauma of being passed from place to place with as much instability as the original home of abuse, 21% of foster youth develop post-traumatic stress disorder as opposed to a mere 4% of the general adult population. So we were also just talking about that. And another site compared the statistic to veterans in saying that veterans also had a similar percentage of post-traumatic stress disorder to children who are in the foster care system. And I think that also depends on the type of veteran you are ultimately talking about, but I don't think that that is too big of a actual variation on what we're talking about there. The foster care system also displays another troubling phenomenon. Although the statistic of child abuse and neglect for black families is lower in proportion of that than white families, and black children represented 14% of the total child population, they make up 23% of the foster care population. In comparison, white children, who represent 50% of the total child population, make up 44% of the foster care population. As racial minorities are disproportionately placed in foster care systems and become targets of its immobilization conditions. The socioeconomic achievement gap affecting the nation's education system is further explained. As a result of multiple flaws deeply embedded in both our federal legislation and social tendencies, the foster care system undoubtedly fails children who need a severe environment, and in some cases may abandon them in a deeper ditch than their origin. Because the flaws in the foster care system are caused by an interlocked network of external issues, there is no there is no perfect situation. Federal incentives like the Family First Protection Services Act work to fund services meant to keep children out of the foster care, but they do so by eliminating current group care centers and thereby displacing thousands during a time of a foster family shortage. However, a series of diverse legislative and social implementations may help take a step further in that direction. We're going to read some of her insights here when we take a quick drink break here. Okay. First, legislation must take a substantial number of measures to fight the public stigma about foster children that discourage many from becoming a foster parent. The stereotypical confinement of foster children as troubled delinquents in charity cases portrays foster parenting as an incredibly challenging, purposeless experience that forces the public to view foster youth differently for when they really are normal children who simply deserve a chance. As the number of children in foster care continues to increase, the shortage of foster parents must decrease so innocent children aren't forced to live in harsh, deplorable conditions. A greater connection of resources and support have to be provided for foster parents to raise the retention rate so children aren't left isolated after their first year. Second idea. Second, the preservation or reunification of the family of origin must be prioritized when ensuring the child's safety and well-being. Although connecting a child to their abusive family is never acceptable, the federal government must fund more research to help protect families that do want their children, to help protect families that do want their children. Separating families creates trauma for children in foster care and further perpetuates the instability in their lives. Providing assistance to biological parents and families will serve as the first step towards breaking the generational cycle of abuse and neglect. So that was that article there, and we have one last article before we get into the person I was mentioning and her biggest issue she had with the foster care facilities and everything. This is by democracychronicles.org, and the headline states the 95% failure rate of foster care in America. The brokenhearted stood up witness in Clinton, Ohio on October 8, 2006. After campaigning political candidates, Finnish families took the microphone. A soft-spoken middle-aged woman went first. Iowa Department of Human Services took my 3 granddaughters that had been living with me, 2 biological and 1 non-biological granddaughter. DHS said I could adopt the non-biological granddaughter, but not the biological sisters. I did adopt my daughter's stepdaughter, but my 6 and 8-year-old granddaughters were sent into a stranger's home where a charge had already been made that a teenage foster goer was abused. My granddaughter was fostered for a year, then adopted by the family, even though I tried to stop it in court. Last year, the 2 girls ran away 6 miles through the woods in their flip-flops to people they once knew. When police arrived, the sheriff took them back to the foster home. I know they are being hurt. No one will investigate. Just as bad. They tell my girls that I don't love them, and that is just not true. So there is one anecdotal experience, but it goes on for another example here. There had never been an abuse in our home. The babies were born prematurely. DHS took our twin baby boys without any paperwork, without court orders, and without any warrant for removal. DHS illegally terminated our parental rights, and when the boys were 10 months old, adopted them out. Then they gave me paperwork. The paper said possible future abuse, even when there was no abuse in our home. We're going to scroll down a little bit for him, farther down. Oops. What the hell are you just doing? There you go. I'm not sure why I did that, but we're good. Actually, this goes on to start reading more. About 95% of the time when state agencies take away children from families, the accusations turn out to be false or unsubstantiated. Our social workers remove children for reasons confusing neglect and poverty, a combination brutally impacting families of color. Our state rules prevent grandparents trying to help in families of crisis gain custody of their own grandchildren, even whose outcomes for children who spend any time at all in foster care are mostly terrible. Children placed in foster care are far too often abused, assaulted, over-medicated, and sexually trafficked, more likely to be depressed and often attempt suicide, become pregnant, or land in jail at an early age. Certainly, some children must be taken out of abusive homes. In 2014, about 1,580 children died from abuse and neglect. With an expanding opioid crisis in America, the number of at-risk children will grow, as will the need for quality foster homes. An article goes on to state many more statistics, but we are going to leave this article up and get into our first video, and we're going to dive in to some of those statistics after the video. Let me pull this up. And like I said, this is from a foster parent's perspective, as you can see from the title. Oops. Wrong thing. As you can see from this title here, it says the biggest problems with the foster care system from a parent's perspective. So now let me resize our video so that we can see all of what she is saying. Alrighty.
Society that needs more help from more worse. The numbers are only getting higher with kids coming into care. And it's certainly not working the way it is. This is an area of our society that needs more help from more people, and it's only getting worse. The numbers are only getting higher with kids coming into care. And it's certainly not working the way it is. We need an all hands on deck approach, and that's simply what I'm trying to communicate to you within this video. Hello and welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, welcome. My name is Kate. We do mom life together, and I talk about living with faith, purpose, and intention. If any of that interests you, I would love to have you subscribe. We also talk a lot about foster care, and this is a video I've tried to film twice, and maybe it just wasn't being portrayed right, so God was preventing me from, like, the first time my mic didn't work, the second time Rosie woke up halfway through and then was like picking her nose, so I wasn't gonna put that on the internet. This video is all about the biggest problems in our foster care system. And I wanna preface this by saying I don't believe complaining changes everything, and this is not a video meant to complain. But this is a video meant to bring awareness and hopefully inspire others to action. And that is my whole purpose of sharing what I think are the biggest problems within the foster care system. I know you can't comment on this, which kind of sucks, but I will put an Instagram post that goes along with this video, and if you want to come on over and comment there, I would appreciate that. And let's get this dialogue going, because action is what it's going to take for change to happen, and people that care and people that are willing to speak up about things like this. I fully believe that. Again, this is not a complaining video. So let's get right into it. So I've worked in the foster care system as a foster parent for almost 5 years now, and the biggest thing I've realized is I have zero control, which is really frustrating for somebody who wants to create an impact. I can create an impact in individual lives, and that fulfills me deeply. I've cared for 11 kids, we've adopted one, and I know I've made a positive impact in all of those children's lives, and hopefully most of those families' lives as well, because a lot of our kids went back to be reunified. However, as a system as a whole, I have no control. I have no control over how cases get handled and all of that. So to start, a system designed for broken families is never going to be perfect. God never intended our families to function the way that they're functioning in today's society. Families are more broken than they've ever been. Our culture is rampant with addiction and mental health issues, and it just seems to be getting worse and worse and harder for these kids, and these numbers just seem to get more astronomical. Like, you research some statistics and see how many kids are in care and how many come in, I just Google your county, your city, wherever you live, and see what the statistics are, and you'll probably be shocked. Brings me to my first point is people with education but not necessarily experience in child welfare are the ones making the major decisions. So the foster care system, I believe, is filled with too many people and too many blanket statement rules. And in saying that, in theory, you would think extra people would be good for the welfare of the child. But in my experience, I found there's always somebody to pass the blame to or pass the buck to, or somebody else is going to take care of this or somebody else is going to take care of that. That what actually should be happening in a case to be in the best interest of the child is not often happening. Again, in theory, more people to help should be a better outcome, but I have found that not to be the experience. People change roles often. People come in halfway through and then have a different idea of what the case is like. Social worker burnout is really high. Like, one of our kids had 5 workers, and that's just insane to me. They weren't with me for that long, so to have like 5 workers in that amount of time is just nuts, because where are the best interests? And I'm not trying to place blame on social workers here. There's some amazing, fabulous, wonderful social workers who are doing great things, but I also think there's some that it's just a job, or they become burnt out to, they have to turn a blind eye to the hard stuff in order to function, because secondary trauma is real. And I can imagine having to see and experience what for us, we have 1, maybe 2 foster children at the home at a time. They've got 15 cases. They're dealing with 15 families, all the hard stuff that comes along with that. So social workers are to be commended and praised, but I just wish that some social workers, once they've been burnt out and they're not being the most effective for the kids, that they would step back, because I think there are some problems that lie in there with too many people involved. And then also too many rules. So our government likes to place blanket statement rules over how things are supposed to happen, But the problem is kids come into care for a variety of reasons: abuse, neglect, mental health issues, parenting capacity, poverty. Like, there's so many reasons kids come into care. There's no way blanket statement rules can apply to each family, each kid, each situation. And that is really frustrating. For example, one of the rules is kin is always the best option no matter what. But kin does not have to be family. Kin can be anybody who has a relationship with the biological parents. So that can be a bus driver. Honestly, who qualifies as kin is way too wide in my opinion, and I don't believe that that is always the best option. I believe attachment is the best option. I think kin, true kin, definitely when you keep kids in their family, that is the best outcome. But let's put an example out there. A child who has been in care for 2.5 years with the same foster family who wants to adopt them then gets moved to a stranger because they're kin. There's no relationship, there's no attachment, there's no, I just don't see that as the best interest of the child. Like, I believe that kin should have been involved through the foster care process. And I mean, I know I've never been in a kin situation. I am speaking from the foster parent side, but I have heard story after story after story where this blanket statement law of kin is the best for the child. And I'm sorry, I don't agree with it. I think there needs to be some reform in what is actually in the best interest of the child. Kin is not always the best interest of the child. There's been situations I've heard of where the kin allows them to see their parents who are big safety issues, who they're not supposed to be having any contact with, that they're then exposed to drugs and abuse because their family, the kin is family, so they're letting the biological parents see the child when they're not allowed to. But because there's that family relationship, that happens. Like, it's too complicated and nuanced to say kin is always the best option. And that's what I mean by too many blanket statement laws. There's lots, but that's the main one.
I can get pretty grumpy when my footwear doesn't have proper support.
Come on, batteries! I need a little juice here.
Oh, you call that pressure?
I'll show you pressure!
Luckily, I got Skechers Arch Fit that gives you the support we all need. Try Skechers Arch Fit, certified arch support.
The next thing is timeline and extensions, and I want to be very sensitive when I say this. I believe that parents should have a good amount of time to get their lives together, to get their children back, to be reunified. I 100% believe in that. There are struggles and obstacles that you or I have never had to face that they have to face and overcome. And if they're willing to face them and overcome them and get the support and get the help, then I am right there beside them, championing them on, and I believe they should have an extended amount of time. But there's these laws that are put into place for timelines for the best interest of the child. If we're at the year mark and the parent is doing just enough to get more time but not actually enough to make major change for the child, I don't agree with that. I believe that the child should get a shot at a good life. And I want to be sensitive when I say this because I've never had to overcome some of the struggles and obstacles that many biological parents with kids in care do have to overcome. So I can't speak from their perspective or their experience, but there has to come a time where the child's needs are taken over the biological family as a whole in order for them to have a shot at a future, because so much of what we see in foster care is cyclical. Kids are in care, their parents were in care, their grandparents were in care, their siblings all have kids in care. Like, so much of it is cyclical. I just believe there needs to be a stronger cutoff point as to when the best interests of the child are taken. How do we give this child the best future? How can we not repeat some of these same things that have happened with generations past? So again, trying to be sensitive, but this is just my perspective. I think timelines and extensions, timelines need to be followed and extensions need to be given in only certain circumstances. But from what I've seen is It doesn't matter if mom hasn't showed up for 6 months. She starts showing up again and she's been to 2. She gets another 6 months to try. And then the child becomes more attached to the foster, possibly future adoptive family. And like, it just makes things complicated. Again, I'm not saying, I don't want anyone to think I'm not advocating for reunification. I 100% believe in reunification. I think that is best for the child when the family unit can be healed and restored and come back together. But so often that is not the case. And I just think there needs to be a more black and white definition of what is best for the child.
What then we care for children, showing concern, shouldn't be treated as the moss on the bottom. Ah, so true. I was under the impression that I was foster parents. Why is it going so fast? 50% of foster parents are in the first year. We are dormant.
The next big problem I see is foster parents need more support. It didn't take long for me to become a foster parent to realize how hard, lonely, and isolating this journey is. There's some people within community, they have lots of foster parents around them. You know, if you go to a big church who really advocates for that, you are so blessed to be in that kind of community. I am not. I go to a large church. I've started a support group at my church, but there's still, from the size of us, we're still a relatively small group. And, you know, nobody in my immediate circle are foster parents. I mean, some are now, but, you know, going through it, didn't have that support, and it was hard. And there's so much in foster care that there's so much of a learning curve, especially those first couple years of being a foster parent. I don't think foster parents get enough support. And in some ways I agree, because if you look at everybody involved in the foster care system, theoretically and hopefully logically, the foster parent is the most stable of all of those people, right? They're not the one needing the most support. They are the ones giving the stability to the system. But that doesn't mean foster parenting is easy. And I think there should be a lot more support from our agencies with foster parents. And often when there's budget cuts, and there always is with government, right? Foster parents are the ones that get affected. For us, we had a huge budget cut a year or 2 years ago, and we completely lost our resource workers. So now our resource workers...
We can finish that video sometime else. But we'll go continue on. I think I'm actually going to stop it here. I will be streaming on Thursday. I will be streaming on Thursday for Getting the Answers are tomorrow at 10 Central Time or 11 p.m. Eastern Time. But I think I'm going to go ahead and stop it here so that I'll have enough voice left to actually talk tomorrow. But thank you everybody for stopping by. Thank you, Ron, for showing up. And hopefully you'll be able to catch the stream tomorrow. If not, you can find it on my YouTube channel, Twitch channel, or any of the other channels there. Thank you, and